morning, everybody. Welcome to Stonebrook. We are going to get started in just a second. If you haven't grabbed a cup of coffee or a donut, go ahead and grab that. Check your kids in at our amazing kids areas if you'd like to do that. And if you don't mind, stand up. We're going to sing a song to start off. Sound great this morning. Go ahead and have a seat. I've got just a couple of things to go over with you. We're really excited that you decided to hang out with us this morning. We've got a brand new teaching series starting today called Crossroad. It's really going to be great, kind of leading up to Easter, so you picked a great Sunday to hang out with us. Like I mentioned before, we do have free coffee and donuts and water in the back, and you're welcome to get up anytime during the service and get some of those. You're not going to disturb anybody if you have to get up in the middle of the service to refill your coffee cup. I understand. We all need the extra coffee, right? Yeah. Me too. Thank you. Oh, we get an amen. Yes. While you're here, the cell service in the building is not very good, so if you want to hop on our free Wi-Fi SBC guest, you can log into Facebook or Instagram, snap a quick selfie. I just got Snapchat last week. I know I'm behind. My son tells me that nobody over like 30 should have Snapchat, but I've got one. It's super fun. I also got a Bitmoji, so I'm like super high tech now. So anyway, if you want to be as high tech as me, hop on our Wi-Fi and go ahead and snap those selfies. Tag #SBRocks so that we can all follow you. So we have an amazing kids area back in the back. You are more than welcome to drop your kids off back there. We've got some fantastic volunteers that have created a space specifically for your kids, and I guarantee you they will have an absolute blast back there. So you're welcome to check them in back there. But if you want to keep your kids with you during the service, that's perfectly fine too. We understand that some families want to stay together during the service. But if you need a private space during the service that's a little bit quieter, we do have a family room back in the back, and you're welcome to use that as well. The service will be streaming live in there, so you won't miss out on what's in here, but it is a little bit quieter back there if you need that space. We have a free gift that we would love for you to take on your way out this morning back at the Welcome Center. It's a little book by Andy Stanley called How Good is Good Enough. And it's a great little read if you have some questions about God or church or Christianity, or if you have a friend that has some questions and you're just like, I don't really feel comfortable or know how to answer those. This is a fantastic resource, so grab one of those on your way out. It's a quick little read, and like I said, it's a great way to answer any questions that you might have. So thanks again, like I said, for hanging out with us this morning. We had a really fun service planned. There'll be a couple fun videos. The band will play a couple more songs. And then, like I said, Mark is going to start with our new series, Crossroads, today. So sit back, relax. We want you to feel welcome and comfortable here. And I hope you have a great day.
Jesus, I am late.
no point of reference. You spoke to the dark and flashed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship so alive, I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises so alive, so alive. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you so alive, so if the stars were made to worship so alive, if the mountains bow in reverence so alive, if the oceans roar your greatness so alive, for if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sun of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it.
Thank you guys so much for worshiping with us. You can have a seat.
I'll be inside in a minute. I want to say hey to Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mike.
Flower beds are looking good, neighbor.
Yep. You guys just get back from church?
Yeah, just been at the church house.
I wonder why he never invites me to church. I mean, I'd go if he asked me to go. But this is the way it is. I'm out in my front yard when he comes home from church. It's always so awkward.
It's so awkward, and I'm so hungry. Ugh. I think my wife made goulash. I love goulash. Oh, maybe Joe would like some goulash for lunch. Hey, Joe.
Here comes the invitation to church.
Yeah?
You wanna come over for
Sure, I'd love to go to
goulash?
church with you.
What'd you just say?
What'd you just say?
No, what?
No, what'd you say? What'd
No,
you
what
say?
did you say?
You said something about God. God.
Goo.
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 Goulash.
Goulash?
Goulash. It's a...
You're having goulash at your church?
No, at my house.
You're inviting me over for goulash.
Yeah.
At your goulash. Yeah, who doesn't like goulash? I like some goulash. Yeah, sign me up. Goulash.
I'll check and make sure we have enough.
I see you walking away.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Mark. I'm one of the pastors around these parts. We're really glad that you're here. This is the part of our service where we take time, talk a little bit about some next steps that you can take if you'd like to get involved a little further. And one way that you can get involved, we try to make it as easy as possible, is to invite a friend to church. This is the time of year. Easter's coming up 2 weeks from today. Everybody say 2 weeks. I expect an Easter basket from all of you, just part of having to attend here. But 2 weeks from now is Easter. This is just the time of the year. People are expecting goulash, so go ahead and ask them. They're expecting to go to church at some point. It's step a little bit out of your comfort zone, but one way we do make it easier, in the seat next to you, or maybe the one you're sitting on, there's some invitations. That's for this series. Next week, there'll be invitations for Easter specifically. But grab some of those invitations on your way out. Don't leave it here without some. And just put one in the hand of a coworker. Buy somebody's meal behind you in the drive-through line at McDonald's and leave a card there with the person at the window. It's just an easy way to invite someone to hang out with us here this April. Another thing that's coming up this coming Saturday. How many of you have kids? How many of you wish you didn't have kids? Don't answer that question. But we love kids around here. We have an amazing kids area. And one thing that the kids, Stonebrook Kids is doing this Saturday from 12 to 2, they're having the Bunny Bash. There will indeed be bunny, candy, eggs. I'm actually coming myself just for the candy. But it's sort of a carnival activities here going on. I'm not sure if it's outside and inside, but last year it was just amazing. Kids everywhere just having a wonderful time. If you have a neighbor that has kids, this is maybe a good entry point for them, where if they are a little hesitant about actually attending church, this is sort of a first step for them. That's this coming Saturday. You have kids, know people with kids, be here and get them here. Like we said, 2 weeks from today is Easter Sunday. Be thinking about who are you going to invite. Pick at least one person that you know and decide, I'm going to bring them with me on Easter Sunday. They're expecting you to do that. It's not going to be awkward. Just make the ask. If you're here and you've been here before and you've never filled out a Connect card, or it's your first time, we would love just to get to know you. In the seat next to you, there's a little welcome pack. The sermon gets boring a little bit later. If you want, you can read through that just to check out some things about Stonebrook. You can take it home with you. Just gives you some information about what we are about. Inside there is a Connect card. There's a few ways that you can get connected. We'd love you to fill out that Connect card. slide it in the little silver box on your way out between the doors, or you can text to 97,000 the word Connect card, or go to stonebrook.tv/connect and get signed up there. We're not going to annoy you. We're not going to show up at your house with stuff. We just want to have a record of you hanging out with us this morning, maybe send you a little gift in the mail, and just get connected in that way. So do that if you don't mind. And then one more thing. How many of you are either married, dating, engaged, maybe just in the market? No, I think you actually have to be a couple. How many of you are like some type of couple? Let me see your hand. Wow, okay. We have this event coming up. It's 2 months from now, a little over 2 months from now, called the Fun Couples Workshop. And what it is, it's Friday night, June 21st, which is my anniversary, and there's going to be a catered dinner, and then there will be this workshop, and then Saturday from 9 to about 2 o'clock, we'll have lunch in the middle of that, but there'll be more workshop, and it's for couples, and look, it says right there, it's fun. So we have already opened up registration. We have sort of an early bird price, and so it's going to, I think that early bird price goes to about May 19th, but it'd be great for you to go ahead and sign up. Registration is open. You can go to stonebrook.tv/fun, or you can go back in the back at the Welcome Center, and they can help you there as well. That's all I have for you. We're going to start a new series, which I'm really excited about. I'll be back here in just a minute to get that started. Thanks for being here, guys.
You didn't sign up for this single life of singleness. Your Christian mingle profile remains mingleless. You deserve an ever after happily, but you better hurry up. You're already 20.
So, we begin a brand new series today. It's going to be 3 weeks, I think. If anybody gets a chance, they could get me like a Kleenex or something. I just don't know. I hung out with Rachel Potts a little bit this week, meeting with different things, and Rachel had snot just running all over her face. It was great. And so I thought, you have some? Cool. All right. That may come in helpful. Oh, do you have some? Well, it's good to have a backup. So we're in a brand new series called Snot and the cross. No, called Crossroad. And I'm really, really, really excited about this, as I always am about every series, it seems like. But I'm really, 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 really excited about this. It's sort of the centerpiece of everything we believe, centers on this idea of Jesus dying on the cross. So we're going to talk about that. I have some ideas that, believe it or not, may be a little bit different than what you have heard traditionally, but I hope that this will give us a lot of things to think about. So just stick with me. Like I say many times, don't pass judgment like on the first 2 or 3 minutes. If you hear something that seems different than what you've heard, just be me standing up here pouring out information and you just digesting it. We want it to be a conversation, and I love when you guys ask questions. So if you have a question, anytime during this series, you can text that question anonymously to that number right there, and we will hopefully have some time to deal with your questions. So we just finished the series, and we had a question that came from this past series that I think we'll take a little bit of time and just talk about. It may not make a lot of sense if you didn't. Hang on just a minute. I have to dig in my nostrils. This should be great. Okay. You feel free to do the same, by the way. In this last series, it was called TLDR, Too Long Didn't Read, where we basically talked about the Bible and the story of God, and we didn't get anywhere close to finished. But in this series, we talked some things about Genesis that for some of you, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, and we certainly are a church of diversity where we have people here that are long time Christians, people that would not consider themselves Jesus followers at all, and are just sort of kicking the tires of faith, checking things out, have a lot of questions, have a lot of obstacles to faith, and that's what that series was about. But in that series from the book of Genesis, talking about the creation story and the stories of Adam and Eve, we suggested, and you don't have to believe this, we suggested that some of those stories were ancient creation stories that were in existence long before Genesis was written, that the people of Israel used as a way to explain something about their God. That it's not necessarily talking about a historical event in the way that we would talk about a historical event, and I'm sure there was some history involved, but they took these stories, these what many people would call creation myths, and used them to tell a very important truth about their God. And so there was a question about this, and here's the question, and this will sort of springboard us into our next series. Based on last week's sermon, it sounds very dignified, the sermon. If the story of Adam and Eve is a myth, and what we mean by that, we're not saying that there's not truth there, but it may or may not be historical. You don't have to believe that, but if it is, if the story of Adam and Eve is a myth, where did sin come from? Well, for one thing, my neighbor, he was really bad at certain things. Sin came right there. But the question, I believe, is sort of this. It's a great question. I love this question. Because there's an idea, people talk a lot of times about original sin. That because of something that Adam did, because of that one human being, then everybody, after Adam, is born into sin. Anybody ever heard that? Cool. Well, if Adam isn't necessarily a historical person, where did sin come from? Well, number one, Israel is telling their story where Adam is representing Israel, and Israel certainly was involved in lots of things that were contrary to the way that God wanted things to happen. So Israel certainly thought of themselves as sinning a lot. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that one person caused everybody else to be in sin. Now, this is a conversation we could have. I could actually talk about this for hours. If you would like to do that, by the way, Jesus Talk Life Group, this Wednesday night, 6:30 to 8 right here. We talk about these things, so we can talk about them in detail. But here's a question. I'm not going to satisfactorily, is that a word? Satisfactorily answer this question today, but it helps us with this question. Are we all under some sort of judgment from God? Are we intrinsically, just by virtue of the fact that someone in our past, whether it was Adam or whether it was Charlie or whether it was a group of people, Israel, did their disobedience of what God said to do pass on to us? Are we all hopelessly lost in sin? And has that sin separated us from God? Where did sin come from, and what do we do about it? Well, sin came from ultimately the fact that human beings are just prone to rebellion. Human beings are just prone to do things their own way. And that's a whole other subject. But here's the question. And for these first few minutes here, I'm just going to really ask a bunch of questions, and I want to spur you to think. Number one, what is sin? What is sin exactly? What is this thing we talk about? Churches talk about it all the time. Sin is God offended by or angry with sin. Is there something that's happening with human beings all over the world, or it did happen before Jesus came, that God was offended by what they did, or that God was angry with sin? Now here's a big question. Is sin keeping God and us apart? This is what I was taught growing up in church, that there was a gap or a canyon between us and God. And they always drew the picture of this huge canyon, and here I am on this side, and there's God on the other side. And God, because of his holiness, because of the standard of who he is, can't be in the presence of sin. That's me. And because of Adam, or because of what I've personally done, it has separated me from God. But then in that picture with the canyon, they have a cross that's like a bridge. Anybody ever seen that picture? Point of Grace, back in the 90s, maybe, they sang a song, "There's a cross to bridge the great divide." And then they turned it around and said, "There's a bridge to cross the great divide." And we all went, boom, that's so amazing. But my question is it true? Is sin keeping God and us apart? Is that what Jesus had to do, is bridge that gap? Does sin have to be punished in order for justice to be satisfied? But this is what I was taught once again. I'm not saying it's not true, I'm just asking the question. Is sin something that God was angry with, that had to receive a penalty or a punishment in order for divine justice somehow to be satisfied? Does God require a sacrifice as payment? Now, I like to talk about history a lot. The idea that God would require a sacrifice for payment is certainly not original with Christianity. Pre-existed Judaism or Christianity, that all of the nations around Israel, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, all have the idea that in order to satisfy the anger of the gods because of what we've done, we must sacrifice. We must sacrifice a cow, a pig, a virgin, our firstborn son. These are all questions that I've had my entire life. For example, I was taught that God sacrificed his son for me. But then I read in the Old Testament that God said, don't be sacrificing your children. So why, if I'm not supposed to sacrifice my children, why is the solution to sin God sacrificing his child? It just never made sense to me. I'm not saying at the moment anyway that it's not true. It's just a question that I'm asking. What exactly does sin do to us? And what does it mean to be free from sin? Here's a big one, because when I was a kid growing up, and even today you hear people talk, and it's perfectly true. Jesus frees us from sin. But what in the heck does that mean? Because we always said, thank God I'm free from sin. Well, then if you ask them, so you don't sin anymore? Oh yeah, I sin. So now these other people that are outside church that are doing all these things, drinking, smoking, cussing, being homosexual, watching R-rated movies, all these other things, they're going to hell, right? Yep. Why? Because they sin? Because they sin, they're going to hell. Yes. Do you sin? Oh yeah. Are you going to hell? No. Why? Because I'm free from sin. You're free from sin, so you don't sin? Oh no, I sin. And it's never made sense to me. So what does it mean to be free from sin? Now, to answer one of these questions, the word sin is, in the New Testament, is a little Greek word, actually not that little, hamartia. Hamartia simply means to miss the mark. This is what happens to Jeannie when I leave town. But to miss the mark, here's the question I have, though. These are the jokes. I'm sorry. That's all I have. To miss the mark. That's all it means. To miss the mark. Now, here's the question I have, though. What is the mark? Now, I've always been taught, or it's been implied, that the mark is the standard of God's perfection and God's holiness. That if I don't live up to the standard of perfection and God's holiness, that somehow I am sinning and I'm missing the mark. I'm going to propose to you that that's not really the case of what the mark is. That the mark that we miss that becomes sin is simply this. The mark is love. God is love. God is love. It's not God has all these standards and all these rules and I have to live just exactly like this. No, God is love. And when I live, act, think in a way that is opposite of the very intrinsic nature of God, which is love, that is missing that mark. The question is God mad about that because I've offended him somehow, or is he more concerned that his creation isn't experiencing who he is? And these are some of the questions that we're going to answer. Now, this series is called Crossroad, and it's a strange thing about Christianity, and I love to analyze what I believe. I don't want to just believe because Mama said or because the preacher said. I want to figure out, is what I believe true? What's up with this? And there are things about Christianity that are strange. But what we're talking about today is the central part. This is what everything else revolves around. And it's the strange idea of what the solution for this sin is. And Christians say that the solution for sin is this. That's the solution. Now, this is from The Passion of the Christ. How many of you saw the movie? If some of you are kind of horrified by the picture, it's all fake blood. It's okay. But it doesn't get even close to describe the horror, the brutality, the torture that this carpenter from Nazareth endured about 2,000 years ago. And we as Christians say, somehow, most of us have no idea how. And it's okay if you can't explain it. I don't want to set up a thing where you think, well, I can't explain every detail, I'm less of a Christian. No. It's wonderful if all you know is Jesus died for my sin. What does that mean? I got nothing, but he died for my sin and I believe it. Great. You are set. You are in the family. But I think a lot of you here are just like me, and where occasionally you think you shouldn't even think this. You think I shouldn't even ask questions like this. But have you ever stopped and thought, what does that do? What in the world did him being beat and bloodied and tortured and hanging on a tree do to get me back in with God? How did that rid me of sin? And so that's what we're going to talk about, because this right here is the centerpiece of our faith. This is the symbol of Christianity. How many right now have a cross around your neck? Anybody? Anybody wearing a cross? Nobody does that anymore. How about that? But a lot of you guys have seen crosses around people's necks, right? Any of you own a cross of any kind, either a necklace or, oh, there you go. What do you do with your cross? Like chase away vampires? What are you guys doing with your crosses? It's the symbol or the icon of Christianity. A brutal, violent, public execution of our founder is the symbol of our faith. If Jesus would have died in the 21st century, I guess we would all have like electric chairs around our necks. Isn't that a strange thing? Why? Like, what is your faith about? This electric chair right here. Everything we believe is about this electric chair. That's what we're saying as Christians, that everything that causes us to be Christians is based on this execution. What is going on here? What did that do? I made the mistake many times of asking this question when I was a teenager. At youth camp, in Sunday school, I would ask, what did Jesus dying on a cross do for me? And they would say something like, Jesus took your punishment or whatever. But here's a question, what did this change? After the cross, before the cross, things were a certain way. Then Jesus dies on a cross. What changed? What happened after that? And how and why does this free me from sin? And here's a question to ask. How did the Jewish followers, how did their Messiah dying become good news? Think about it. This is the message. We had a guy that he's the Messiah. He came to rescue us. Really? What happened to him? They killed him. How is that good news that their founder is brutally, publicly executed by the Romans and the religious leaders of the day? Is it, or was it, divine destiny? Is this something that God just had to have? Is this an edict that God declared that there's requirements for sin to be punished? You guys have been bad, you've been evil, and instead of venting my wrath on you, the divine requirements of justice require me to vent my wrath on God. And how do Roman soldiers beating Jesus cause God to punish him? How does all that work? Or, this is kind of where we may eventually be going, was this the heartless, murderous result of a violent, sinful human race inspired by religion? And when we mean religion, we mean that organized system of trying to earn our way to God's favor. Now, when we talk about the cross, there's a word that we use. It's kind of a churchy word, but it's a word that describes what happened on the cross. It doesn't actually describe it well, but it's a word we use called atonement. Just say atonement together. When people talk about the atonement, they're talking about Jesus dying on the cross, that process of death, burial, and ultimately resurrection. The word atone simply means to cover. Now, you'll remember probably from our discussion of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, that they felt shame and hid, and they wanted to cover themselves. The people of Israel had the idea that somehow God's upset, that somehow we can't be close to God anymore, so we have to cover our sin so God won't look on us. And so that was the idea where atonement came. I would like you to think of it a little bit differently and simply take the word atonement and break it up, and let's call it at-one-ment. That this is the event where Jesus is on the cross, Jesus is being tortured, Jesus dies, where this is the event that actually reunites, reunifies, reconciles human beings with God. We were apart. Why that is, we'll talk about. But because of the cross, something happened there that brings God and us back to one. It is at-one-ment. But how does that happen? Now, theologians are just fancy Christians that have a lot of time on their hands. Theologians like to debate and try to explain these questions, because I'm not the first person that's asked this question. For thousands of years, since the crucifixion of Jesus, people have said, okay, this is amazing. He rose from the dead. Millions and billions, actually now, of people believe that somehow Jesus has something to do with God, and they follow him. But they try to explain, what in the world did that cross do? And these are called atonement theories. Now, the prevailing number one atonement theories, and there's lots of different, and when I say theories, this is just ways to try to explain it. The main one that's the most prevalent is called penal substitutionary atonement, PSA, public service announcement, penal substitutionary atonement. It's a word that makes us giggle. It's spelled differently, though, so don't get it wrong. It can be very embarrassing. But the idea is that God is upset, that God is even angry. I just listened to a video the other day of this famous preacher talking about God is angry every day with the sinner. And there's a very famous sermon by Jonathan Edwards called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And so that God is somehow angry, full of wrath, because we have disobeyed his commandments. We have disobeyed his standards. We've definitely missed the mark, and we've rebelled against him. So somehow sin has to be punished. So God doesn't want to punish us. So what he did was he brought in Jesus as a substitute. It would just be like if I committed murder and someone comes along and say, don't send him to jail, I will go to jail for him. Penal, he's going to prison in my behalf. Penal substitutionary atonement. Most of you, in fact, how many of you have ever heard that concept that that's what Jesus is doing? He's replacing me and taking punishment for me. Cool. Now, what I'm going to try to suggest to you, and some of those ideas are that Jesus, this is illustrations that I always heard, that Jesus is God's whipping boy. Now, when I was a kid, I thought this was great. It's a great idea. I don't know if you've ever heard this idea. It actually happened with some royalty during the Middle Ages, where if you were a prince, well, a prince shouldn't get spankings. So when the prince misbehaves, the prince had his own whipping boy. So, okay, prince, you've misbehaved, bring in the whipping boy. And so they would spank the whipping boy, and so we've now punished the prince through the whipping boy. And so I thought it was a great idea when I was a kid. I need like 3 of those whipping boys really quickly, because this will show how old I am. Here's where we old people can talk about how old we are. Anybody here have to go out and cut your own switch when you see? Look around. These are good people. Some of you never had to cut your own switch, and it shows. But you had to go out and cut your own switch. We had maple trees, and you always had to make a decision. Okay, do I get this big one because he'll probably knock me out with this one? But this little thin one, that has some whipping action to it. Boy, if you had shorts on. You ever do that? I don't know, this is what my dad would you go around a circle and your dad's doing this. It's like, come on, where is DFS when you need him? I don't guess there was DFS back then. But anyway, that Jesus is the whipping boy. That Jesus, I deserve the punishment, but Jesus comes along. He takes it for me. And then God forgives based on what Jesus did, bearing the penalty of God's wrath against sin. Now, this always felt a little bit to me like the mafia. That God is not just forgiving me because he's merciful, but he's being paid off. He tells me to just forgive you. If you do something against me, I'm not supposed to say, well, if you'll sacrifice your firstborn son, we'll call it even. I'm supposed to say, you're forgiven. But God, for some reason, can't just do that. He has to have a payment. So in one sense, and this is why I always struggled with it. So in one sense, God isn't being merciful to me. He's received what he's after, and now we're good. I owed him $5,000. I didn't have $5,000. You come along and say, hey, God, I got $5,000 right here. God says, counts it out. Okay, that's good. Okay, Mark, me and you are good now. He's not being merciful. He's been paid. In fact, I read this. I don't know where this came from. I think I was online and I saw this. This is from the Daily Promise devotional. Perhaps you have this. And it said this: forgiveness is how God dealt with your sins. Sin requires payment. This is the general idea that's put forth, that payment is death. Jesus' death on the cross made payment for your sin. And the wall that separated you and God was removed. So here's the idea I have. There's a canyon, there's a wall, there's some sort of separation between me and God. Jesus pays for it. Now, I want to present something to you, then we'll get to Scripture, and I'll start going faster. This is what is called the gospel in 30 words. The gospel simply means the good news, the message of who Jesus is. This is what Jesus came to do. Jesus is God with us. Come to 4 things. Jesus came to do 4 things. Show us God's love, save us from sin, set up God's kingdom, and shut down religion so we can share in God's life. What we're going to talk about in this series is mainly number 2 and number 4, but for sure number 4, that what Jesus is doing on the cross, all 4 of these certainly, but he is saving us from sin. How is he doing that? But he is also shutting down religion. And we're going to see that religion is ultimately what kills Jesus. Jesus, we say this all the time, and this is sort of setting it up, and I know this is taking a little while. Jesus reveals what God is really like. Jesus reveals what God has always been like. And Jesus does this most perfectly on the cross. The cross is the ultimate picture of this is what God is like. And that's what Jesus is doing. Jesus did not come to change the mind of God about humanity. Jesus came to change the mind of humanity about God. And we'll flesh that out as we go, because the idea has traditionally been God is angry, God needs something, so Jesus comes and changes God. But God doesn't change. Jesus actually came to change us. Now, there's a story, and we're going to look at two different events, if I can get to it without spending too much time on these other things. Leading up to Jesus' death on the cross, there are two events that happen that I want us to look at, but they're both in the book of John. The book of John doesn't necessarily get too concerned with chronological order, but almost all the events surrounding Jesus are sort of involved with the various feasts that happen during different times of the year in Jerusalem. And here we pick up at a feast where Jesus says this in John chapter 7. On the last day, the climax of the festival, this is a 7-day festival that we're at, Jesus stood and shouted to the crowd, "Anyone who is thirsty may come to me." This has always been a strange verse to me, that all of a sudden, Jesus just stood up and said, "Anybody is thirsty, come to me." And that was the end of his sermon. We are in the middle of a festival that is called, and I've always called this Suck It, and I always thought that was kind of a stupid thing to say, but it's actually Sukkot. It's called the Feast of Booths. It's celebrating the people of Israel one time a year. I always thought this was really cool. This is the time of year to be Jewish. The people, for 7 days, they live in tents or booths. They are remembering that they used to be in the wilderness on the way to Israel. But it's called Sukkot. This is the feast that Jesus is shouting, "If you're thirsty, come to me." Now, why would he say that? At the end of the feast, on the very last day, on the climactic day, there was a ceremony that happened where the priest would leave the temple with sort of a vase or a jar. And they would make a procession, sort of a parade, down to the pool of Siloam, just down the road from the temple. And the priest would dip that bucket into the pool of Siloam, and they would parade back through the streets of Jerusalem in their priestly garment, and people are waving palm branches, sort of like when Jesus came in. This was the ceremony. And then the priest would take some wine and that water and would pour it out. It's called a libation offering. Pour it out before the Lord to remember and to offer thanksgiving, frankly, for the harvest. This is the time of the harvest when that was happening. So in the middle of that, right before this happens, Jesus says, right before the ceremony where they take this water and pour it out, he says, "If you really want water, come to me. I'm the answer, not this religious ceremony. Anyone who believes in me may come and drink, for the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from his heart." Like I said, this is a libation ceremony. It happens on the final day of Sukkot at the pool of Siloam. Okay? Now, as Jesus begins to do various things, and this is heading up right to his execution, he had lots and lots of crowds coming to see him, but it says in John 7 that the crowd was divided about him. Some thought he was who he says he was, and some thought that he's sort of deranged. Some even wanted him, and this is really important, over and over they wanted to arrest him. Why would they want to arrest someone that is doing good? This is important to know, and we'll talk about that. But no one laid a hand on him. Now, during this festival, John tells a little more detail of this story. As Jesus was walking along, and I have to hurry, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. "Rabbi," his disciples said, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" The Jews had actually come up with this theology that a person could sin in the uterus. Before you were born, you could have done something that displeased God, And that's why you were born with whatever disease or whatever malfunction that you had. And so they're having a theodicy here, a theological discussion, saying, was this his sins or did his parents sin that caused him to be born blind? Jesus put an end to that notion. And Jesus is showing, you guys, you're spending too much time thinking about sin. Because that's what the Jewish people thought. Something bad happens, that's sin. We have to be conscious of sin. Jesus comes along to reveal who God is, says, I'm not really that concerned about sin. What I am concerned about is this guy needs help. He said it was not because of sins or his parents' sins. This happened so the power of God could be seen. The power of God hasn't been seen in him yet, but it's about to be. Then Jesus does this really cool thing. I loved it as a child when Jesus did stuff like this because I love to do this myself. Then he spit on the ground. My mom would always tell me not to spit. And I would say, Jesus spit, and Bob Gibson spit before he pitched. So I'm going to spit too. That's when you had to cut a switch after that. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. What the heck, Jesus? Why don't you just heal the guy? We got places to go. Jesus is about to make a point. And then he told him with this mud on his eyes, go wash yourself, there it is, in the pool of Siloam. So the man went and washed and came back seeing Jesus is, as he often did, snubbing his nose, poking his finger, snubbing religion. Because of this ceremony that they've added to what the Word of God says, where we walk down the street in our priestly garments and everybody sees how holy we are, and we dip this water. This is this wonderful ceremony. Jesus interrupts their church service. When the priest gets there, it's full of mud because a blind man's just been there and washed his eyes. And suddenly their ceremony is interrupted by the fact that God himself actually showed up, and the reason God showed up was actually to help somebody. And here's this guy walking down the street that's been blind his whole life, and now he can see. Jesus is showing it's not about ceremony. It's not about religion. It's not about a temple. It's not about a priest. It's about love, and love heals. And so he came back seeing, and his neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? And I love this. People have always been doubters. It's not just a 21st century thing. Here's a guy that's been sitting by the side of the road blind his whole entire life. He's walking around seeing, isn't that him? But some said, no, just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, no, it's me. Look, it's me. They asked, who healed you? What happened? It's a pretty good question. He told them the man they called Jesus made mud, spread it over my eyes, told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now, they asked. I don't know, he replied. This is one thing I love about Jesus. I wish I could talk more about it. He is so cool. He is so humble. If this was today, TV preachers, they would be right there taking up an offering. They would be right there making sure it was in their newsletter. Over and over, Jesus would heal somebody, just back into the shadows, like Homer Simpson going back into the bushes. One reason he did that is so he wouldn't make a big splash. Making a big splash and having a big rally is going to upset the Romans, and it's going to upset, as we're going to see, the religious leaders, and the sooner that happens, the sooner it culminates in his death. We could talk about this as Jesus talked too. Just his death wasn't all he was about. If it was, he could just come die when he's a baby and get on with this. There's much more to that. So it took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, that's the religious leaders, because, and here it is, dun, 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 it was on the Sabbath. He healed on the wrong day. He healed on the most religious day of the week, and this was on a festival. It was on the highest day of the festival, which was also a Sabbath. And this guy is upsetting our religious system. He's actually disobeying the Bible. The Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them, he put the mud over my eyes. When I washed it away, I could see, and some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, he can't be from God. He's working on the Sabbath. Even though this blind guy who has received an amazing, can you imagine being blind your whole life and all of a sudden you can see? Have you ever thought that through? What an amazing gift. And they say, this guy can't be from God. He's disobeying the Bible. But some of them said, though, how can an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? And there was a deep division of opinion among them. These signs that Jesus, this one and another one we'll talk about last week, led up to this ultimate showdown between Jesus and the religious leaders of the day that culminates in his execution. Jesus is coming out of the shadows with these amazing, amazing miracles. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? He said, I think he must be a prophet. And they still refused to believe, so they called his parents and said, is this your son? Was he blind? If so, how can he see? And they said, well, this is our son, and he was born blind, but we don't know how he was healed. He's old enough to ask himself. His parents said this because they were afraid, because the Jewish leaders had announced anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. They would be cut off from their community. So they called the man in again. For the second time, they called the man in and said, God should get the glory for this. We know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. Why? He's disobeying the Bible. We have these rules. We have these regulations. He's going against that. It can't be from God. He said, I don't know whether he's a sinner. I love this verse. This is a good Pentecostal verse right here. This one thing I know. Huh? Mm-hmm. You sort of do that with your Pentecostal preacher. Give me a little organ back there. Mm-hmm. This one thing I know. I was blind, but now I see. And that's really all he cared about. And Jesus is kind of making a point. That's really all we need to care about. It's just about me. It's real simple. You just get to me. You don't have to go through a ceremony. Anyway, but what did he do? They ask again. How did he heal you? Look, the man said, I've told you once. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to be his disciples too? This really ticked him off. Then they cursed him. Can you imagine the priest? Bleep, bleep, you bleep and bleep. That's what this means. That's in the Greek. Bleep, everywhere. They cursed him and said, you're his disciple, but we're the disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. And here this blind man sort of gets smart aleck. And I really like this blind man. I want to meet him someday. Why, that's very strange. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he's ready to hear those who worship him do his will ever since the world began. No one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this were not from God, he couldn't have done it. And here they have the same idea that we talked about. You were born a sinner, he said. Are you trying to teach us? And they excommunicated him, throw him out of the temple. When Jesus heard what had happened, we got about a minute or so left. Stick with me. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he said, who is he? I don't know. I've been blind my whole life. I don't know what you're talking about. I want to believe in him, says, you've seen him, and it's me. Do you believe in me? And he said, and this is the contrast between all the ceremonies of religion and the beauty of relationship that Jesus is trying to reveal. He simply said, yes, Lord, I believe. And that's just really all it took. Now, give me a minute. Here's what I want you to get, just to give us some food for thought for next week. Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment. What is the judgment Jesus came? To give sight to the blind, and to those who think they see, that they are, to show those that think they see, that they are blind. Now here's what I want you to see. He's not talking about physical blindness, but Jesus states that the reason he came into this world, notice this, Jesus came to eliminate blindness. There's a kingdom of darkness. Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. Jesus came to shine a light in darkness and to take away blindness, even from people who think they can see. This is what Jesus is doing on the cross. He's eliminating blindness. He's shining a light in darkness where people think they know who God is. And he removes blindness. In fact, 2 Corinthians 4:4 says the only reason that people do not approach and accept God is because the God of this world, whom we would call Satan, God's enemy, has blinded their minds. Jesus comes into a time in the first century when all of humanity has their mind blinded concerning who God is. And on the cross, he is shining a light into that darkness and revealing something about God that they do not know. And we'll talk about that next week. You only had to stay a minute longer. You get no extra credit for that. That should just be expected. If you are here, I'm going to let you go here in just a minute. We would love to pray for you. If you have, we all go through stuff. We all have those times. And Eric over here to my left, just an amazing guy, an amazing prayer. He knows Jesus. Well, there's a spotlight on him. It's like, that's just his glow. Eric has an aura. But he would love to pray with you. You can go see him afterward and do that. Don't leave this building without taking some invites. Bring a friend next week as we prepare for Easter. Father, I thank you so much for what you have given us in Jesus. Thank you so much for the revelation of who you are through him. Open our eyes, I pray. And any blindness, any blind spots that we have, give us revelation as we discuss this together. We love you, sir. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you next week.